Take a look at this map. It shows the 10 most valuable companies in Europe. As you would expect, most of them are located in some of the world's largest economies like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. But one of these companies stands out. In fact, the most valuable company of them all, Novo Nordisk, is located in the relatively small country of Denmark, a country with just under 6 million people. Despite that, Novo Nordisk has become more valuable than the likes of Walmart, Mastercard, and Tesla, producing half the world's insulin supply and releasing revolutionizing weight loss drugs. It all started as one man's dream to better the world. In 1920, for his research into how the body regulates blood flow during exercise, August Krogh was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine. This led to him traveling from his home country of Denmark to the United States for an extensive lecture tour throughout the country. Upon arriving, Krogh heard about the recent discovery and purification of insulin, a drug vital for people suffering from diabetes, a disease which at the time was seen as a death sentence. When Krogh heard this, his eyes lit up, for not only could this save thousands of people back home in Denmark, it could also save his wife, for it just so happened that his wife Marie had been diagnosed as a diabetic a few months earlier. So Krogh hurriedly wrote to one of these insulin inventors, John MacLeod, and eventually took a detour from his lecture tour to meet him in Toronto. They quickly bonded over their shared passion for medicine. Krogh spent days at MacLeod's house learning everything he could about insulin and eventually acquired the formula and permission to manufacture it. He was going to bring insulin to his home country of Denmark. Krogh returned to Denmark on December 13th, 1922. The next day, he met with Dr. Hagedorn, the man who had initially diagnosed Krogh's wife with diabetes, to discuss how best to move forward with producing insulin. They first had to familiarize themselves with the production process provided by MacLeod. They made some minor adjustments, such as using pig pancreas instead of shark, which was in short supply, and Denmark had a large pork processing industry. They also needed money. Instead of asking the Danish government for funds, which would have taken too long, they approached a local pharmaceutical company, Leo Pharmaceutical Products, to establish a partnership. Within a few months, insulin production had started and the first diabetic patients were treated. However, the demand was far greater than they could have imagined. During the initial production and use of insulin, Hagedorn and Krogh were approached by countless people pleading and begging for their insulin, but they had to remain strict and ensure that once a patient began insulin treatment, there would be enough to continue, even if production lapsed. By the spring of 1923, insulin production was increasing sharply. Krogh and Hagedorn founded the Nordisk Insulin Laboratorium to facilitate the export of their new formula, Insulin Leo. Things were looking bright due to a significant boost to the purity and output of Insulin Leo. Nordisk's insulin production was approaching that of pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly. However, things changed abruptly in the spring of 1924 after Thorvald Petersen, a key member working for the company, and Hagedorn had a heated argument. It was no secret that Hagedorn and Krogh could be difficult to work with, and eventually the tensions led to Hagedorn firing Thorvald. However, this decision would turn out to have grave consequences, for shortly after leaving, Thorvald together with his brother and daughter started producing their own insulin in their basement. When Hagedorn and Krogh hired Thorvald, he had signed a declaration promising he would not use what he had learned about insulin production for competitive purposes. However, Thorvald's daughter had not been asked to sign any documents and felt free to use what she had learned to produce insulin. So Thorvald, together with members of his family, founded Novo Therapeutic Laboratorium. This was the start of a bitter rivalry which would last decades. The differences in their companies couldn't have been greater. Whereas Krogh and Hagedorn belonged to the established social and intellectual elite with deep roots in the scientific world, Thorvald and his brother simply referred to themselves as the manufacturers, as their expertise was in ruthless efficiency. Krogh had initially sworn Thorvald would never succeed since he didn't have the same connections and knowledge in the industry as Krogh had. However, Krogh couldn't have been more wrong. Nordisk's head start with insulin production had made it well established across Scandinavia. So Novo's growth strategy focused mainly on serving export markets across Europe and beyond. In the following decades, both companies grew rapidly and competed fiercely up until 1989, where the two rival companies merged to form Novo Nordisk Pharmaceuticals, becoming the largest producer of insulin and diabetes care products in the world. In the following years, Novo Nordisk continued to grow steadily, eventually obtaining a large portion of the lucrative US insulin market. However, the company's trajectory was about to change drastically. In December 2017, Novo Nordisk received FDA approval for a new drug, Ozempic. Originally developed for type 2 diabetics, it would turn out to have another neat effect. It made its users lose weight. Ozempic is made up of a component called semaglutide, which works by mimicking naturally occurring GLP-1 molecules that regulate blood sugar, promote insulin production, and interestingly also suppress appetite and reduce cravings. Despite that, semaglutide's weight loss potential was initially neglected, as over the years people had been bombarded with countless weight loss drugs, which either didn't work or had dangerous side effects. Semaglutide was different, it actually worked. But it would take a global pandemic before people began to take notice, as a lot of people suffering from obesity looked into ways of losing weight fast, since they feared for their lives, not wanting their weight to cause them to die of COVID. 230,000 semaglutide prescriptions were written in 2019. That number jumped to over 9 million by 2023, and that resulted in a lot of money. A month's supply of Ozempic will set you back roughly $1,000 and is meant to be used indefinitely. A recent Yale study estimated the cost to manufacture a month's supply of Ozempic to be below $5, which would allow for an outrageous profit margin. Even though Ozempic was only approved for type 2 diabetics, it had become the go-to weight loss solution for the rich and famous, being used by some of the most influential people in the world. It even got referenced in the 2023 Oscars.
They look so great. When I look around this room, I can't help but wonder, is Ozempic right for me?
Novo Nordisk took notice and got FDA approval for semaglutide to be used specifically for weight loss under the product name Wegovy. All of this skyrocketed Novo Nordisk's valuation, surpassing LVMH in August 2023 to become Europe's most valuable company, peaking at just above a $600 billion valuation in March 2024. To put that into perspective, Denmark, the country where Novo Nordisk operates from, entire yearly economy is worth just above $400 billion. This has actually started to become a problem for Denmark. If you look at Denmark's GDP, it grew by 1.8% in 2023. But without the Danish pharmaceutical industry, which Novo Nordisk dominates, Denmark's GDP would have decreased by 0.1%. This might not seem like a problem, but if you look at Finland in the early 2000s, Nokia's market cap was almost twice that of Finland's GDP, which boomed Finland's economy. But when Nokia collapsed with the rise of smartphones, Finland's economy stagnated. And if we look back at Novo Nordisk, their growth hasn't come without competition, as their biggest competitor Eli Lilly released their own weight loss drug Zepbound in November 2023, which research indicates to be slightly more effective than Wegovy.